And we're live. Hey everyone, my name is Kajal, and today our guest is KAYLEE from Just a Coder Thing. If you can hear us, tell us in the chat below, say hi, tell us where you're from, and tell us what's the most exciting part for you today. Hey Molly, hey Hannah, hey Samantha, hey Anika. I'm sorry if I said the name incorrectly. I see a message from Ashley and Sanjida. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm super glad that you all took the time to come and join us today. As you know, this is another episode in the part of Get Ready for GHC 2020. So I know this year GHC 2020 is virtual and a lot of us are anxious, but I have some good news for you. KAYLEE has recently attended another virtual career fair, so she has a lot of information on how things go. Of course, we don't know everything that is happening with GHC 2020 this year, but we can definitely anticipate certain things. And based on that, KAYLEE will be sharing some of the insights on how to do things well, on what are the things that are in your control and how to do that, and most importantly, how to find a job at GHC. And I know it's tough times, the pandemic is going on, you're not getting the same responses from companies, but keep at it. Sometimes it does take a bit of while, but you're gonna get there. We believe in you and we are here to help you. So without further ado, KAYLEE, take it away.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I am so excited to talk to you all today about preparing for job hunting at Grace Hopper. So for a little bit of background, I first attended Grace Hopper in 2016 as a Grace Hopper scholar, which was really exciting. That was my first time at Grace Hopper, and it was just so amazing to see all of the opportunities available to women in STEM. I mean, my university was pretty small, so the number of companies that recruited directly for my university were pretty limited, but it was so eye-opening to see how many different industries and how many different businesses that technology really applies to. After that, I attended once more in 2017. I also attended last year recruiting, and this year I'm going to be attending as a virtual attendee and also as a speaker, which I'm really excited for. So combining all of my past years of job hunting experience at the in-person Grace Hopper. And then also, I did attend a virtual career fair earlier this year. So I'm really excited to talk more about how to navigate this virtual climate, since I know there's a lot of questions. And of course, we don't know specifically how it's going to work. Nothing has been released from Anita B about how Grace Hopper Career Fair is going to function. But I do think there are a lot of things that you can do to prepare, even though it's virtual. And then also like some things that you can anticipate with a virtual career fair. Awesome. So my experience having attended Grace Hopper previously is the #1 most important thing to do in order to get a job at Grace Hopper is update your resume and then upload it to the resume database. Like, this is the utmost important thing. And to do this sooner rather than later is really important, and here's why. So most companies will gain access to the resume database at different points ahead of the conference, depending on their sponsorship tier levels. What I've noticed in the past is that companies will typically, whenever they gain access to the database, they'll do a download of all the resumes in there, and then start sifting through it to see if there are like keywords added resumes that match open positions, or people that they're looking to hire. But they typically don't do a second download, is what I've noticed. So it's really important to put your resume in there as soon as possible to make sure that your resume is available to as many companies as possible ahead of the conference. The reason that this is so important is because when you are like going and applying for jobs, there's always the links that are on the company's websites, but sometimes they also have additional opportunities that are available specifically to Grace Hopper attendees. I know I've already seen a couple of these links floating around on Facebook in the Facebook groups. So I definitely know that they're out there, but it's really important because they can reach out directly to you instead of you having to go to the company. That being said, yeah.
Just a quick question that I have received in the pre-submitted one. Do you have to have a ticket to the Grace Hopper to be able to submit your resume to the database?
That's a great question. And the answer is no. The resume database is open to anybody who is looking for a job right now. The great Anita Borick has a career center, and that's where you can actually see job openings, and you can upload your resume to the resume database, and you do not need a Grace Hopper ticket of any sort. You don't need the full pass or the career fair pass to upload your resume. Those two are completely separate. So definitely do that if you're looking for a job, even if you can't attend Grace Hopper. It's still a really great way to take advantage of some of the opportunities that you know, a lot of companies are looking to hire a lot of women at this event. So it's definitely something you shouldn't miss out on if you're looking for a job right now.
Yes. One more question. So GHC is less than 20 days away. Is it too late to upload my resume now? Especially that I haven't received my Anita B membership yet. You don't need your Anita B membership to be able to go to the database. Just sign in as a guest. Just create a new account, go ahead and submit your resume. What's your take, KAYLEE?
Exactly. Yeah, totally. And also, it's definitely not too late. So first of all, like, do it as soon as possible if you can. Second of all, it's definitely not too late, because I know, especially with things being really chaotic this year, a lot of companies' recruiting timelines have definitely been shifted back. So it's definitely possible that a lot of companies, you know, haven't been as proactive about reaching out to candidates through the resume database. So it's definitely better to put that in there. Also, I will say a lot of companies will go back to the database after the conference. So good idea to put your resume in there. And in addition, you can always reach out to specific companies you're interested in outside of them reaching out to you. So it's just it's like a great insurance policy to put your resume in that database as soon as possible. Awesome. So like I mentioned, there's definitely like, don't panic if a company hasn't reached out to you or if you haven't heard from companies. My best advice is to start applying to companies now ahead of the conference. And here's why I think this is really important. When I was job hunting, what I did is I definitely applied through links that I received from companies. They would send me an email saying, you know, this is our application that's open. And I would apply through those links ahead of the conference. But separately, the companies that I knew were attending, which are typically on the sponsors list. So you can go onto the website and you can look at the list of sponsors. Like, the sponsors pay to sponsor the conference. And as a result, they get certain perks, which are usually like a space at the career fair or interview booths, things of that nature. So it's a pretty safe bet to assume that, because, you know, if a company is sponsoring GHC Virtual 2020, then they are going to be present at the career fair. So what I did is I would go ahead and apply to those companies I was interested ahead of time. And that way, a lot of times I could get through a couple of the first rounds of screening before the conference. So a lot of times that meant like a hacker rank, or something like a HireView, which is a virtual interview, or even just a simple phone call with a recruiter. And the best part about this is that by the time you get through a couple of rounds, a lot of times it sets you up to have an interview scheduled at the conference, which I found super beneficial, especially when the conference was in person. Again, not entirely sure how interviewing is going to work since things are virtual, but my assumption is going to be that they will have some form of interviewing during the conference. And if not, it definitely helps to mention to a recruiter, if you get to speak with somebody before the conference, that you are attending Grace Hopper and that you would like to interview as part of attending Grace Hopper.
So here's the question: that where do they find these links to apply to companies? Do you go to the company website or do you just search?
Great question. So kind of a mix. So I think there are definitely companies that will send out emails saying, hey, here's an application link. We noticed that you're attending Grace Hopper. But don't panic if you didn't receive one of those emails, because there's other ways of finding those links. Another great resource that I would definitely recommend is joining the Facebook group. There's one called Grace Hopper Celebration 2020. And a lot of attendees will post in that group links that they've received from companies. So I think that's like a, first of all, really good place to start for Grace Hopper specific links. I think additionally, it never hurts to go directly to a company's website. Look, they'll usually have some kind of careers or jobs page. And from there, you can look at all the open positions that they're recruiting for at the moment. And then you can apply that way as well. And don't worry if it's not a Grace Hopper specific link. Not all companies have those. Some companies will actually get to the conference and talk to them at the career fair. And the first thing they'll tell you to do is go and apply online. So it's really helpful if you've done that step already, because then you can come and show up and you say, look, I applied online, I've passed your hacker rank, you know, I passed a phone screen. What are the next steps? I'm really excited to move forward in this, you know, in the interview process. And I think that really helps you stand out at the conference. So definitely worth taking the time to start applying as soon as possible to the open positions at companies that you're interested in who are sponsoring the conference. So another thing that I get asked a lot about is interviewing at the conference. And I touched on this before. I'm not entirely sure how this is going to work virtually. In years past, when the whole conference was in person, you would have a career fair booth, which is where the company and the recruiters, the employees of the company would be talking. And then there was a whole separate section of the conference, which were just like these booths where companies could have several different booths to interview candidates. And from my experience, some companies do choose to interview at Grace Hopper and some companies don't. In either way, I've noticed that the interview slots at the conference itself do fill up really quickly ahead of time. So it's really important to try and apply as soon as possible so that you can talk to a recruiter, express interest in interviewing at the conference. Or I've also had interviews scheduled like on the first day of the conference if they still have interview slots open towards like the later half of the week. So it's definitely not too late if you don't have something scheduled, now. But definitely prioritize the companies that you're really interested in working for, and ask if they are doing on-site interviews for the virtual Grace Hopper as up to like the first or second day of the conference. After that, I've noticed a lot of the slots tend to fill, and they'll just refer you to like a future set of interview dates that are set aside maybe for specific Grace Hopper attendees, but they'll be outside of the conference itself. That's also not a bad thing because interviewing takes a lot of time and there's so much to do at the conference. So don't worry if that happens to you. Is there another question?
Yes. Can you shed some light on how the interview booths are? Is it like a 10 one-on-one, or is it you will just randomly talk, or will it be longer?
Yeah, I've had a huge range of experiences. I've had some interviews that were 30 minutes just with one person. I've had some interviews that were two people with me. I was interviewing with two people, and I had like two sets of interviews. So it was like 2 rounds of interviews. It really varies a lot based on the company. So typically I will say that internship positions will have fewer rounds of interviews than full-time positions. So that's just something to be aware of. I've had a lot of my interviews for internships were about 45 minutes, whereas I would say the full-time positions would be an hour or even 2 hours, depending on how many rounds there are. And then also the content of the interviews, it varies a lot by company. I've had some that were very high level technical questions that they ask, explain object-oriented programming or explain what an object is. And then I've had other ones where you're definitely whiteboarding code, or they give you a piece of paper and they ask you to actually write out your solution on the piece of paper and talk through how you would implement something. So there's a lot of variety for this piece of it. I actually think that the Grace Hopper interviews follow pretty closely what the company's standards are as a whole. I don't see them diverging too much. So I think, Glassdoor is a great place to go. Even on Reddit, you can find a lot of threads about interviewing at certain companies. So there's definitely, if you go online and you're searching about interviews at a specific company, I would expect the Grace Hopper, job application track and the interviews to look more or less the same as what the company typically does outside of the conference.
Question. So how does one book interview slots?
That's a really good question. So most of the time, the best way to book an interview slot is if you've passed some of the pre-screening steps of a company's online application process. So you apply online. Most places I've applied have sent some kind of hacker rank or a coding challenge to do like straight off the bat. And you usually have to pass that before you move on to either, in my experience, it's either been like a hire view, which is a virtual interview, or a phone screen with a recruiter where they ask you about different things on your resume just to make sure that, you're a good fit for the position and that it is something that you're really interested in. And also to ask if there's, any timelines they have to be aware of with other companies. That's usually when, after you've passed a couple of the first screening rounds, they'll reach out to you and ask to schedule an interview. So it's not really that you go to a company and you book an interview, but the companies reach out to you after you've passed a couple of the first screening rounds, and they offer to schedule an interview. And if this happens to you, especially ahead of the conference, that's a great time to let this recruiter or whoever's reaching out know that you're attending Grace Hopper and would love to interview on site as part of Grace Hopper. Again, I'm not entirely sure if all companies will be doing that this year since everything's already virtual. It's very likely that they'll just be scheduling an interview with you, according to the interviewer's availability and your availability. But if there is an opportunity to interview at Grace Hopper, I definitely recommend taking that up. So I've covered a little bit about interviewing. I've covered a little bit about my past year's experience at Grace Hopper. So for the career fair itself, I did attend a virtual career fair earlier this year. It was very similar to the real career fair in the fact that there were different booths. So on the screen, there was something called career fair, and you could actually see the different names of the companies, and you could click to go into a booth for a specific company. And once you were in the booth, they actually had people from the company with their video on and their microphones on, who were either answering questions or talking to people who entered the booth. The cool part about the platform that I used for the virtual career fair I attended was that there was a chat function. So you could type things into the chat and ask questions to the people who were in the booth. You could also request to turn on your microphone and video so that you could talk directly to the company's employees who were in the booth and who were recruiting, or just answering general culture questions or things about the application process. There was also an option to enter a breakout room, which is something that I did. My company was hosting an event on Hacker Rank Prep. So we actually created these breakout rooms that allowed people to go into smaller groups with employees. And so my assumption is that Grace Hopper is going to be on a very similar platform. I'm not entirely sure of the exact specifics of it, but I think that the career fair experience is going to be more or less the same as what you would expect in person. Are there any questions so far? Yeah.
So the question goes, is it bad that if I haven't received any invitation for interviews yet, and how can I increase my chances of getting an interview at GHC Career Fair?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wouldn't worry too much. I've had like a lot of my interviews got scheduled actually the week before the conference. So I wouldn't worry if you're not getting requests for interviews right now. I think it also depends on how long ago you applied. I know a lot of companies just recently opened up a lot of their positions and their applications online. So it takes them a little bit of time to, sift through all the resumes and, decide which candidates they want to move forward with. So don't stress about that. I will say, for increasing your chances though, trying to clear as many of those hoops ahead of time, I think, is the best way to increase your chances of getting an interview at Grace Hopper. I'm also still not entirely sure if companies are all going to interview at Grace Hopper. And the reason for this is because since things are virtual, it's, there's not a whole lot of benefit to interviewing during the conference, because I think something that a lot of companies are conscious about is that if you're interviewing with them, then you're not attending some of the other great opportunities that Grace Hopper has to offer, which includes the talks, the workshops, there's panels, and then there's even things like the poster day. There's so many other things that are going on during this career fair that a lot of companies are recognizing that they don't really want to take away attendees' time from some of the other pieces of the conference. And especially right now that we're virtual, I don't know how many companies are going to choose to interview during Grace Hopper. I think the real important part, though, is not so much where you interview, but just making sure that they've identified you as a Grace Hopper candidate, because a lot of companies will fast track some pieces of the application based on the fact that you're a Grace Hopper attendee. And beyond that, just getting the interview scheduled, I think, is the thing to focus on, not so much about scheduling at Grace Hopper. Because like I said, you also do want to attend a lot of these other amazing opportunities that there are at the conference. So yeah, that would be my best advice.
So here's another question. Are there companies only looking for candidates that will join immediately, or you can expect companies that would be hiring for future, let's say May 2021 or end of this year?
Yeah, I think it will definitely depend on the company, but just from past experience, typically the recruiting cycle right now is for next spring/summer. So internships would be 2021, and then full-time starting 2021. I also know a lot of companies offer like co-ops during the semester. So they definitely have the opportunity to get like an internship during the semester or working part-time. All of that is fair game. I think that the important thing to remember too, especially for like the end of this year, if you're looking for something that's a little bit sooner, that's like a really great point to bring up when you do get an interview scheduled or when you speak to a recruiter, because they should just be really transparent with what you're looking for and like what kind of timelines you're working with. I definitely think 2021 people are hiring for that. You can also, like, I've definitely heard of this happening. If your situation or circumstances change, for example, like maybe you're going to go back and pursue a master's degree and you thought you were going to graduate next spring, still go and apply for, full-time positions starting next spring, and then worry about moving your start date when you get to that. Unless you know right now that, you can't start full-time positions for 2 years, and maybe look for internship positions instead. So start dates are adjustable, and I wouldn't worry too much about that. I think the important part is getting through enough of the pre-screening where you can actually talk to a recruiter and they can work with you once you have an offer so that it, really fits your situation and what exactly you're looking for. So don't worry too much about the start date is my best advice.
Yeah, just to add to that, even if you get through and you decide that you don't want to continue through this offer, that's okay. They're going to still keep you in file because you're a good candidate for them. And when things
Yes.
change and you reach back, they're going to go like, oh yes, this candidate, I've interviewed them in the past, they already cleared all the rounds, we're going to just do maybe one quick interview with them again and offer. So think about that as well.
That is such a great point, because interviewing is actually a very expensive process for companies. So they put a lot of time and effort into scheduling these interviews and recruiting candidates. And when you find a good candidate, like, they are definitely going to make a note of that. So don't worry too much about that. Like, they would be very excited for you to come back to them, even if circumstances change and you have to adjust the start date. I found most companies to be very, very willing to work with you when, as you know, if you bring these things up and you bring up these concerns. So things are always flexible. That's, I think, the big thing to take away.
So another question is that I still haven't received any online assessment. Is it bad? Should I wait any longer? Will the number of companies looking for position increase as we get closer to the conference date?
Yeah, I definitely think the number of companies looking or opening their online applications will increase. We are still on the early side of the recruiting season, I think. It's still early September, and historically, actually, Grace Hopper used to be later in the year. So, I think the timelines have all been moved up, and with everything going on with the pandemic, I know a lot of companies had to push back their full-time hires starts and their internship start dates. So it's just like, kind of imagine everything got shifted back. So I wouldn't worry too much if you haven't received any, coding assessments or things of that nature. I definitely think also it's a numbers game. So a couple of things to note when you're applying to different companies. I think being organized is super, super critical. Like, make a list of all the companies you're interested in who are sponsors of Grace Hopper, who are going to be attending. Also, just because somebody's not sponsoring, I think there's a couple of lower tier sponsors that maybe didn't make it on the list. I know I've seen in the Facebook group, people have compiled these great Google Docs of all the companies who are attending. But, make an Excel spreadsheet or something like that, or an Asana board or a Trello board about all the places that you're applying. Just be really organized with it, because even tailoring your resume to the specific job that you're applying for makes a really, really big difference. Because honestly, resumes, I'm sure these companies get hundreds of thousands of resumes, especially FANG companies. So they're going to be using some kind of automated algorithm to parse through those resumes. And sometimes the best way to make it past that phase of the application is tailoring your resume to the exact description of what they're looking for in the position opening. So taking a couple extra minutes to highlight the experience that's relevant to the job you're applying for at that specific company can really make a difference in how quickly you process forward in the application process. So I think that it definitely takes a little bit more time, but it's worth it in the end, because I think you'll see a lot higher callback rate, I guess, or of companies reaching out to you after you apply through their online application.
And here's another question. So question goes, it seems like most positions are for new grads or interns. Are there any differences when navigating GHC as an experienced candidate?
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I have noticed the majority of positions are tailored to either new grads, so for internships, or full-time. I think that being said, there's always positions open on companies' career websites. I think almost any company, even ones that have had a harder year, there are always positions there where they're hiring for people with more experience. And actually, in my experience, even when a company is hiring for people with more experience, it's really hard to market that, because there are so many people from school, just through the nature of Grace Hopper. Obviously there's the scholar program, and a lot of universities choose to send students to the conference. So I think the attendance of the conference also tends to be, pretty heavily on the side of people looking for new grad positions. That being said, go to that company's website, look at the different positions that they have open online, and see if there are things with more experience that you can apply to. I also think that's a really great chance to go and talk to people at that company's booth, because sometimes the recruiters will have a lot more information on what that hiring process looks like for somebody who's not a new graduate. Because it's basically, just think of it as different tracks. If you're a new graduate, there's one application track that follows, and that probably applies to the majority of the Grace Hopper attendees that I've interacted with when I was recruiting last year. But just because you have experience and you're looking for something different, still go talk to them, because it probably just means there's track B. and it's just not advertised as much because it probably applies to fewer people. So it's not that it's not there. It's probably just takes a little bit more work and digging to go through and find that, but it's still a great place to get hired and to have a lot of visibility with a lot of companies when you have more experience. So don't let the fact that it's not advertised put you off from looking for those job postings and job listings.
A question. So when you said that you should apply online, do you mean apply online to the job postings on the GHC career center page, or to go onto the company's website and apply there?
Yeah, so the GHC job listings page is new to me. Like I didn't see that in the years past when I was job hunting. So I'm not entirely sure what the pipeline looks like for applying through that site and how that gets routed back to the company. Personally, if I was given the option, I would maybe I would probably apply on the page for Grace Hopper and then also go to the company's website or see if in the job description on the Grace Hopper career portal, if there's a link to an application on the company's website, just because I'm not sure how often these two systems sync, and I wouldn't want your application to maybe get lost as part of applying through a separate external system. So I think just as an insurance policy, apply to both if the job listing description on Grace Hopper career site also points you to the company's website, and then you can apply there as well. I think it's better to cover all of your bases just in the event that, there's a technical error and something doesn't pike through to the company. You wouldn't want them to miss out on your resume. So I think that's probably the way to do it. Awesome. So yeah, I'll pause here for a second and just any other questions before I continue to talk about different ways to prepare for Grace Hopper, because I think even though we're virtual, there are still a lot of things that are in your power to control, and there's a lot of things that you can do to prepare yourself before the conference. All right.
So one question that comes in is, I see a lot of positions for software engineers, but I don't see for other fields like embedded. Do companies hire for these different roles such as embedded as well?
Yeah, so I've gotten this question a lot, especially for people who are looking for like product roles or data analytics roles. I would say overall, like I know I've seen companies that will have like one application for software engineering, but then once you apply, they'll actually match you for the more specific role that you are interested in. It just might not list it on the job description. So first of all, I wouldn't let that put you off. I've definitely seen people hiring for more specific things. I actually think it's a huge plus when somebody comes to the booth and says, look, this is what I'm really passionate about and this is what I want to do, because a lot of people don't know. And, that's why there are those more general software engineering applications, because, it's really to fit anybody. So I definitely think that they hire for all sorts of roles at Grace Hopper, despite what's listed on the job application. And I also think it doesn't hurt if you don't see that position open, you can go ahead and apply, but then you can also go to that career fair, that company's booth, mention what you're specifically interested in, and then ask if that's a different track or if you need to apply to a different place. But I've definitely seen them hiring for all sorts of roles at Grace Hopper, even if it's not directly advertised on their website. So just because it's not on the website doesn't mean they're not hiring for your roles. Awesome. So now to talk a little bit about preparing yourself for Grace Hopper. I know I talked about uploading your resume. I think that's really huge. Another thing that I think is especially important this year with things being virtual is to add the tagline for Grace Hopper 2020 or the hashtag for it in your LinkedIn header. And the reason that I think this is really important is for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's a huge networking opportunity. Obviously, by nature of us being distributed and virtual, it does take away some of the opportunities to network with other conference attendees. But by including this tag in your header, it allows you really quickly to go on LinkedIn to search other people who are attending the conference. And you can find people with similar interests or backgrounds, or even some from your university maybe that you didn't know was attending the conference, and you can connect them that way. The second piece of why it's so important is it lets recruiters know that you're attending the conference. So like I mentioned before, a lot of times companies will have specific tracks dedicated to people that they recruit at Grace Hopper. And if that's the case, you want it to be known by recruiters who are looking for good candidates on LinkedIn everywhere. You want them to know that you're attending the conference. So putting the hashtag GHC 2020, or I've also seen the hashtag VGHC 2020, something along those lines, I think is going to be definitely increasing your visibility and let people know that you're not only looking for a job, you're also going to be attending the conference. So I think that's like a really important thing that you can do to help prepare yourself. Another thing that I want to mention really quickly about the resume is that when you're putting together your resume, you're polishing it up, you want to have like a ready to go copy of your resume, especially for the career fair. So make sure you have the copy of your resume available in multiple formats. So I think it's best to save in a very easily accessible location, like on your desktop. So you have it ready to go. Make sure you title it something like your first name, last name, followed by resume in like a .doc, which is Microsoft Word, and also a .pdf. I think PDF is great because the formatting doesn't tend to change as much when you send someone a PDF versus if you send it in Microsoft Word and they open it on Pages or in Google Doc, then sometimes the formatting can get off. So a PDF is a great way to make sure all of your format stays in place. Another thing I would do is take that PDF, upload it to Google Drive, and then save the URL. You could even use, if you want to get really fancy, you can use like bit.ly or something like that to shorten the link into something that's a little bit easier to read. But keep this Google Drive link to your resume handy. That way, if you're in a career, you're at the career fair and somebody asks for your resume, maybe they don't have, maybe their connection's bad and like it's not coming through email. If you're trying to email them your resume, you can send them a link and they can go directly to the Google Drive, download your resume, and then also view it right in the browser. I think like this, I've had companies actually ask for my digital resume, even when the conference was in person, because, physical resumes take up a lot of space, like companies leave with stacks of paper. So I think especially given that we're virtual, it's really important to have your resume available in as many different virtual digital formats as possible, because you never want not having that format ready to prevent you from, moving forward in a job application process. So another thing that I think is really important to think about when you're going to Grace Hopper is really researching the companies that you're interested in interviewing with. I think obviously there's tons of companies that attend the conference. Really putting in the effort to learn what a company does, why you're interested in working there. If you can answer the question like, why do I want to work at blank? I think that will make you stand out so much when you enter a virtual career fair booth. And you are engaging with employees and recruiters of that company. Like really just researching what they do, what are their open positions, why does your skill set match, their vision or their mission statement for the company. I think it'll really help you stand out because, as part of the recruitment process, and I'm sure, Kajal, that you can relate to this, you talk to so many people, and the ones who really prepared and they can say definitively, like, this is how I found your company, this is why I want to work for you, and this is why I'm really passionate about like what your company does, it really sticks out. Like that, those little bits of preparation and having like questions lined up to ask you, it's just such a difference. It sounds small, but it has a huge impact.
Yeah, so when I went in 2019 as for recruiting for my company, I would have people line up and then they'd come and then they'd throw all this stuff at me and it had nothing to do with my company. So my company was a robotics startup, and then someone would come and talk about something that is completely unrelated. And I would have to stand there and listen to them because I don't want to be rude. But I'm like, can you tell me stuff as to how you relate to my company so I can give your resume to the recruiter and be like, yes, let's talk to them. But if you're just throwing stuff at me and making me work to find things that are of interest to me, it's not going to work. Don't make me work.
Oh my gosh, yes. I had that happen so many times as well. And like, I work at a finance company. And so when I even ask simple questions like, why are you interested in financial services, like the intersection of technology and financial services? And people would just stare at me as if they didn't even know that I worked at a finance company. And so, yeah, in those cases, it is hard. You're trying to like get to know this candidate because, they've come and expressed interest and given you their resume. I mean, given some people do it for the free t-shirt, that definitely happened. And you could definitely spot those people, but with the lack of swag right now, I think most people will be looking for a job. And it just makes such a big difference, like doing a little bit of research. And honestly, I think being virtual right now is a huge bonus because you can have your notes pulled up right there on your computer screen and nobody will know. It's all hidden. Because you're not in person, you don't have to memorize this list of things. You can have your questions ready to go, and it takes away a little bit of the stress of having to like be in the moment and super rehearsed and prepared. I mean, still rehearse and prepare. I think that's a good thing to do, but investing a little bit of time and creating a short list of companies. I think it's not enough to apply to a company just because they're a really big name, or, you know, like just for the reputation. I mean, I think those are great starting points, but like dig a little bit deeper, have something that, you know, connects to you specifically and your skill set and your experience, and then ask great, like good questions to the employees. I think that's the best way to express interest, is just having thought really critically about something on their website, or maybe it's a program that they do, and then asking good follow-up questions from there. Like those applicants to me always stood out the most, and it's something that takes a little bit of time, but it just pays off in huge dividends. So
yeah, it's like, you know, if someone's done the effort of researching my company and telling me everything that I need to know, they're at the top of the list, because I can
yeah.
see that they're the kind of people who put the effort to do research, and that's the same attitude they'll bring to the job. So do your research.
Exactly. And those kinds of things are really telling when you talk to someone, and like, you know, like you know, when you're talking to someone, you can tell when they've really done their research. And, you know, I think sometimes that passion for a mission statement or just researching, that can stick out so much more than even your past experience. So it really does. It really helps to go completely above and beyond, and make sure you're sticking to a short list. Like I said, there's so many companies. I think it's maybe possible. I don't even know if it's possible to talk to every company at Grace Hopper, because there's so many of them. And you'll probably spend some time in lines and things like that. But, you know, like prioritize your time, make a short list of places you're really excited about, and go from there. Speaking of that, I do know that I'm talking about job hunting, but I also want to say that there are so many, if you have a non-career, so if you have like a full access ticket, this year Grace Hopper did allow tickets to only enter the career fair, and I realized that doesn't get you access to all the other pieces of the conference. But if you do have like a full pass because you're a student or you came on scholarship, I definitely recommend checking out some of the workshops and the talks that are tailored to helping you do things like acing a technical interview. There are workshops this year on negotiation. There are workshops on, you know, how to make your elevator pitch stand out. I think there's a lot of those workshops that you could actually attend during the conference and like incorporate that feedback into the way that you're job prepping and talking to people at the career fair booth. So, you know, career fair is great, but also don't lose sight of the fact that there are other resources that Grace Hopper provides that can really help you like refine, you know, your elevator pitch and, you know, refine your interviewing skills and things of that nature. Awesome. So another thing that I really wanted to talk about is prepping for the interview before Grace Hopper. I think this is really, really important, because I've actually had an interview scheduled like on the spot at Grace Hopper. That one did not go very well because I was really shocked. I was thinking that I would get a little bit more time, but I was talking to somebody at the booth and they said, can you step away and interview right now? And I granted, I realized that the chances of that happening virtually are probably less likely just given the situation, but that did happen to me, where I got asked to step aside and interview right on the spot. And I was completely frazzled. I was completely unprepared, and it ended up not going very well. So I think it's just best to approach going into the career fair as though that is your first audition. That is the first impression that you get to make on a company. So even preparing your elevator pitch, and I know that you just had a session on like, you know, doing your elevator pitch and like crafting and making sure that that's really solid. Like that's the first impression that you make with recruiters and with employees of a company. So really tailor that and make sure that you're rehearsed and that you're ready to interview like on the spot, because I think in some ways, talking to employees of the company is like your first interview. I think that's also why sometimes companies will fast track like a job application process because they've already talked to you in person. So typically, you know, if you go through a hacker rank and then you get to a phone screen, you know, they still haven't really met you or gotten to know you yet. So by setting up that interview, that's like the first time the company gets to interact with you. But a career fair is totally different because they already see you face to face. So there's already a lot of questions that they can kind of answer, or they can ask you about their resume, which helps them know if you're a good fit for a position. So that definitely helps you move through the process a little bit faster. So just remember that those first impressions really count. So it's super important to prepare all of those things in advance. Awesome. I'm just going to pause super quick and see if there's any other questions. I know I've talked about a lot really fast.
No, that was good. So here are some of the questions. How many companies ideally should be on your list?
Oh, that's a good one. So when I applied, I think I applied to around 55 companies. I got, a series of hacker ranks or coding challenges from about half of those. And then I ended up having 8 interviews scheduled at Grace Hopper, and I got 7 offers. So if you think about it, like you start off with little over 50 applications in my case. And at the end of the day, I was left with 7 offers, which was super exciting. But it just kind of gives you an idea of how many places you need to apply. Obviously, it's not going to work out every single place that you apply to. You're not going to be a good fit for every opening. I think 50 is a good place to start, but I think it depends on how much you're able to manage. Because I think it's better to put out like 20 really fantastic applications than like 70 okay ones, because you're probably not going to hear back from as many places. So you just want to make sure that your yield is high as possible. I actually even A/B tested my resume. So I would I had 2 versions of my resume based on like different sets of feedback. And I sent them to like half of the companies I applied, and I kept track of like which resume got more coding challenges or like interviews scheduled after the fact. And so that way I could use that resume in future job applications. So I know that's like kind of extreme. You don't have to do that. But I think it's a numbers game. So applying to like starting with 25 and then seeing how many hacker ranks and coding challenges you get back and then scaling that up is a good way to start. You also just don't want to overwhelm yourself, because I've also had companies that will send, once you move like forward, your coding challenge, it'll expire in like 48 hours. So you don't want to get like 7 coding challenges that are all expiring in 48 hours. Cause like, I don't know about you, but I probably wouldn't be able to sleep to get those all done. And that's not an enjoyable way to spend a weekend. So just keep that in mind, like maybe stagger things out just to make sure that you're not like totally overwhelmed. Cause I'm sure whether you're doing school or working at a job or looking for a job, like we've all got other things going on. So just make sure to keep that balance in mind.
Yeah, and the same advice that KAYLEE gave before: stay organized. Excel sheet,
Yes.
whatever's your thing, stay organized, because you start to lose track of things and then you don't want to mess up. Like you might have
Yeah.
just somehow managed to get in a coding link only to forget about it.
Yeah, no, I had one where I completed it like 10 minutes before the deadline at like 11:45 at night because I forgot about it. Don't do that. It is so stressful to be in that position. And you also don't want to, miss out on this great opportunity just because it like slipped your mind. So, Google Calendar reminders, alarms on your phone, Excel spreadsheet, whatever works for you. Just keep it all organized so that you know what status, each of your applications is at. It's a really huge help.
Here's a bit of a tangential question. So, right now, all the workshops are full. Do you think they may increase the size or something? Some of them looked really good, but I was not able to register for any.
So I'm actually leading a workshop this year, which I'm super excited about. And yes, I did notice that it filled up pretty quickly, as did a lot of the workshops. So here are 2 things that I think are going to happen. Number 1, at even Grace Hopper in person, a lot of the pre-registration for workshops were completely full, but then people they would lose track of time, or they would have an interview or something else would come up, and then they wouldn't actually be able to attend. And not everybody remembers to like deregister themselves. So you could actually show up, and whatever seats weren't filled 5 minutes before the session, you could just go walk into one of the sessions. I think something very similar is going to happen this year. In terms of increasing the size, running a workshop myself, which is building your 5-year virtual career vision board, it's really hard to like put on a workshop for hundreds of attendees. Like even for me as, like a workshop host, I was really anxious about the idea that we would have like an unlimited number of people, just because, we want to be able to answer questions and as we go along. And it's really hard to do that when you're scaling at that size. So I don't think that they're going to increase capacity, but I think people, first of all, are not going to show up because of interviews or career fair or otherwise, or just life obligations. And I also think people are going to be changing the sessions they're registering for. So just keep checking back. I was able to actually get into a couple of talks that were full just by going back and logging in at a later time. And I've seen in the Facebook groups a lot too, that a lot of people were able to get into workshops that were full just by going back at a later time and, snagging a couple of empty spots. So check back. And then also for the ones you're really excited for, just set an alarm reminder and see if there's a way to like enter that at the time of, in case there are open spots.
Okay, back to the career fair questions. Are the career fair booths going to be open all day? And do we have a link to this yet?
So no link. We also haven't heard anything concrete from Anita B about how this career fair, virtual career fair, is going to go. In the past, the career fair closed at around 4 to 5 p.m. I don't remember the exact time. And then it opened at 8. And then, well, when we were in person, the interview booths would open a little bit earlier than that. I think the reason for that is like they don't just want it to extend on forever. So it is open all day, but not past working hours typically, because everybody who staffs the booths, those are definitely people who are working from companies and want to be mindful of their time as well. So I think you can expect much more flexible hours from the career fair than like some of the workshops. So if you have to pick between the two, prioritize some of the workshops or talks that aren't going to happen again, whereas the career fair will definitely be open for a longer period of time.
Next question. Oh, I lost a fit. Oh, yeah. How should I navigate GHC as an international candidate?
Oh, that's a great question. Something I've seen so much about. I can't really speak to this too much because I'm not an international candidate. So I didn't deal with a lot of like the sponsorship and visa issues that I know a lot of students are facing. I think the best way to go about it is to just, go on companies' websites and see if they're sponsoring. There are some companies that are very publicly stating that they are sponsoring international students. I also think there are a couple of international students who in the same Facebook group, the Grace Hopper Celebration 2020, they're putting together lists of companies that they know are sponsoring international students. So try and work off of those lists. Also try and ask the companies directly when you go to the booth if they sponsor international students. I think that's like the best way, but I know especially given everything going on right now, there's just a lot of uncertainty around hiring international students. And unfortunately, I don't know too much about how companies are going to approach this. I do think it'll be on like an individual company basis. So going and asking them, I think is the best way to go about it.
Just to add my experience, I am an international student and I attended Grace Hopper as an international student. Some common things you can keep an eye out for. So if it's a government sponsored company or, like an FBI or US government, then you can know for sure that, or at least 90% guaranteed, they won't hire international students just because of clearance. That being said, there are websites out there where you can check if the company sponsors or not. I think one of them is called Free Visa Jobs or something like that. It's there on the Facebook group. I'll find it and add it in one of the comments later. But you can go to these website and check if those companies are hiring international students or not. That being said, once you get in touch with a recruiter or, when you're talking to a recruiter at the career fair, point blank ask it, because I have been through processes where I went through the whole thing, and in the end, just about when they were ready to give me an offer, they're like, oh, we just realized you're an international student and we don't sponsor. So might as well just off the bat, there's nothing wrong in asking that. Straight away ask that, are you going to sponsor visas, yes or no? If not, then there's no point wasting both of your time. Also, I've seen a lot of candidates think that, you know what, no, I'm just still going to take the job anyway. And then, maybe I'm so good that eventually they'll change their mind. I would say don't do that. It's very rare that that happens, because applying for sponsorship is not just as easy as filling out forms. It's a huge expense to the company. They have to hire lawyers. They have to also fill out certain government forms to be eligible to apply for sponsorship, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of manpower and cost involved in that. So ask upfront, just like straight up ask, do you sponsor or not? And then, like KAYLEE said, on the Facebook group, ask your friends or ask someone who's in similar position, do you know if these companies sponsor? Just ask that.
Definitely. And I think one thing I have noticed is that smaller companies, so companies that are like startups, will typically not sponsor just because they don't have the resources. Like you mentioned, it's a very expensive process to the company and it takes a lot of resources. So I've noticed that a lot of like the bigger companies that have like dedicated internship and full-time tracks, not only will they advertise that they sponsor on their website a lot of times, but they have the resources to do that. So if you can in your job search, obviously, like if there's a smaller company, it doesn't hurt to ask. But I've noticed, like as a general trend, that a lot of the larger companies have the resources to be able to offer sponsorship to international students.
So next question is to KAYLEE. Will your workshop be recorded?
So I'm not entirely certain. I believe it will be recorded. I think it will be. But Grace Hopper also hasn't told the workshop presenters a whole lot of details about how the workshops are going to be run and recorded, etc. So I can't entirely promise it, but I think it will be.
Another question. How important is it to mention dates in the resume? The person asking the question has a career gap and they're afraid that the date might highlight a gap in their career.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I personally would put the dates because I feel like at some point in the conversation, it could come up anyway. You don't want it to seem like you're hiding something. So I think just by being really transparent is a good way to kind of tackle it head on. And then I also think that whatever the reason is for that gap, to just like come up with a couple of sentences of like what the reason was for it, just in the event that you get asked. I mean, personally, when I'm looking at a resume, it's like I'm looking at the resume, I'm talking to the person, I have like not even 20 seconds to skim over it. I'm not doing like the mental math to figure out if there's a gap in someone's experience, like just being on the recruiting side of things. So I wouldn't stress out too much about it. I do think it's helpful to have dates as a reference point, just so someone knows like which one's your current position, etc. But you know, I like when I look through resumes, I definitely don't have time to like put together all of those details on the spot at the career fair. So don't be too concerned about it, but then just make sure that you have something prepared in the event that you do get asked about it.
Yeah, own your experiences. You know it's coming, might as well have a prepared answer.
Exactly. And I don't think it's a bad thing to have a gap in employment. Like, I think the world's changed a lot and there's so many reasons for someone to have a gap in employment. So if you do get asked about it, just make sure you're ready to talk.
So, our next question is, considering some of our interview processes being during GHC, how long do you think a process goes on for asking for full-time positions?
Oh, okay. So as a follow, I guess is it like from time of application to the time that you get the offer, I think is probably how this is being asked. For me, if I interviewed on site at Grace Hopper, I typically had like a yes or a no answer by the end of the conference. Not sure if they're going to follow the same, like those are really tight timelines. I'm not sure if they're going to follow the same thing, but I will say this, companies really fight for top talent. And they know that by giving an offer, turning around an offer to a candidate sooner, they can get the edge on another company. So I have experienced pretty quick turnaround times. So if I applied in advance of the conference, I interviewed at the conference, I could typically expect an offer by the end verbally, and then some kind of written follow-up within a week or two of the conference. That's been my experience for the timeline. In terms of like interviewing and the time it's going to take at the conference, I would expect, you know, maybe 1 to 2 hours of interviews tops from a certain company at the conference. Even then, I think 2 hours is definitely on like the heavier side. I feel like most companies do at least 1 hour at the conference, and then they'll schedule some follow-up if they do want to do a second interview.
Yeah, it's a range of things. Also, another factor I wanted to include, so when I went to Grace Hopper, I ended up networking and someone set me up for an interview. And then later I realized that that position was not open yet. The person who I networked with was looking for this position, but they had not
Right.
put it into their company and it was not yet opened. So for them, it took a while to get back to me and give me that offer. But so it goes both ways. Sometimes you will hear by the end of the conference, but sometimes it might take a while. But you know, just like maintain that connection, and if you have something going on, keep asking them, following up. So you know, stay on top of it from your side so you can get a faster answer.
Yeah, and that reminds me, if you have another competing offer that has a deadline, like a lot of times companies will say like, we want a response from you within 2 weeks, and you're still waiting to hear from another company, follow up and let them know that. Like, be as transparent as possible about like other offers you're waiting for, because a lot of times a company won't just want to miss out on a great candidate because of a timeline thing, and they'll speed up their internal processes to try and get you an answer as soon as possible. I also think it doesn't hurt to ask a company if they're giving you a really aggressive timeline, like by the end of the day or by the end of the week, to ask them for an extension on the offer because you're waiting to hear from other places. So it kind of goes both ways, but don't get too, you know, scared about accepting an offer just because, you know, of a timeline, or like the other way around. Like, definitely mention it to a company that you're waiting to hear an answer from, especially if you're really excited about the position you interview for.
Our next question is, I'm looking for entry level full time positions starting May 21. How do you suggest to talk about relevant intern experiences or projects?
Oh, yeah. So if you have internship experience, that's fantastic. Like definitely bring that up as part of your career pitch or your 30-second elevator pitch. Like I think that's a great thing to put in there. Maybe just like a couple of really quick details. Projects are awesome. Definitely have a dedicated section on your resume if you've done some great projects. Like I think that really shows a lot of, you're taking the time, you're like coming up with an idea, you're following through on it, you're learning something new. I mean, it's like a very self-starter attitude to see that somebody has a lot of projects that they've done on their resume. So make sure those two things are highlighted on your resume, and make sure those are like some of the top things that you talk about in an elevator pitch or as like part of a follow-up question. If they ask you a follow-up question, like make sure you have those. I think it's like the star answer and like following that format so that you can come up with how to like fold that into the conversation naturally without it just seeming like you're listing off like a bunch of different projects and internships.
So next two questions, I'm actually going to combine them. Will there be technical interviews happening at GHC? How could people prepare best for it? And are there going to be any whiteboard coding sessions?
Yes to all. Okay, so yes, definitely technical interviews for sure. I think out of my 8 interviews that were scheduled at Grace Hopper, I think like 7 of them probably were whiteboard technical or some kind of writing code. Obviously that we're virtual now, like a lot of companies will use CoderPad or something like that, where it's just an online code IDE and then both sides can see what you're typing. In terms of preparing for those, it really depends a lot on like your background, whether you came from, for example, from like boot camp or in a traditional computer science degree through school. I actually have a couple of blog posts about how to prepare for a technical interview and how to like ace the technical interview, like what you should do during the interview over at my blog, Just a Coder Thing. But I think the top things to do is to practice talking out loud through like while you're coding your examples. Practice, just doing leak code problems, doing HackerRank problems, cracking the coding interview. If you don't have it yet and you're pursuing a career in tech, go get a copy of that, whether it's like a digital copy or, the physical book. It's really thick, but most of the book is actually solutions to coding problems, and just practice. I think it'll give you confidence. It's going to help you in the interview. And I think the last thing to do is know your like sorting algorithms, know your time complexity, which is like the O of N, know your data structures, even simple things like how to get the size or the length of a data structure and then how to add or remove. These are methods that like, obviously it's not the same across all data structures. It's just good to be really confident about that because it definitely shows in an interview. If you hesitate, is it dot length or dot size? Like those kinds of things, it'll just help to eliminate all of that since you'll have the practice of coding it all from scratch.
So we're coming close to the end of our session. We'll take a few more questions. Before that, I'm going to do a shameless plug here. Go check out KAYLEE's blog. It's called Just a Thing. It's included in the description. She writes amazing posts about her tech journey that could definitely help you. I have read them. It has been helpful to me. I am sure they'll be helpful to you. And I'm also going to do a shameless plug about my channel. If you enjoyed this video and if you're enjoying this live session, consider subscribing and turning on the notification. And you can also always reach to me through LinkedIn. I know some people don't like commenting publicly and asking questions. Go ahead, connect with me on LinkedIn, send me a message. I try my best to answer most questions, but sometimes it'll take a while. But yes, feel free to connect with me and send me a message anytime. I love helping people. And with that, let's continue with our questioning.
Thank you so
much. Here's another question. Please, could you give us a demo elevator pitch or tips on an elevator pitch?
Oh, yeah. So I think number one is time it, like make it 30 seconds or less, because people's attention spans, especially in this world, are growing shorter and shorter. Make sure that you have like the top, I think there's like 3 things that are really important about an elevator pitch. Like number one, like what's your current most relevant experience? Number 2, if you have to sum up in 1 sentence, like who you are, think about that. And then the last thing is like, what are you looking for? And how does what you want to do align with who you're talking to? Like whatever company it is, or, like even the role of the person, like how do you bridge that connection? And I think that last piece is what is the hardest because you're tailoring it to the specific person or company that you're talking to, but it really stands out. It makes a huge difference. Just make sure you're covering all three of those things. When I hear people that just like, you can tell it's like they hit play and they go through. I also think it's really good to practice it in a mirror. Like just watch yourself, just, get the whole act. It's like putting on a show. It's like an audition. So just get really comfortable with that 30-second spiel and you won't even feel nervous after you've done it like 10 or 12 times. You can actually record yourself doing it. I did that too when I was job hunting, just to be sure that all parts of it made sense and the flow of it was really good. So try that out.
Yeah, elevator pitches are practice, practice, practice. And
Exactly.
I have another video on elevator pitch from Shilpa Veer, where she talks about things you should do, things you shouldn't do. And there are 2 live pitches that she did before and after. So you can see exactly what was wrong and what were the things that should be done and what were the things that were done right. So consider checking it out. I've put it in the chat. And let's take 2 more questions.
Yeah, let's do it.
So, question, where can we see the list of companies hiring and what positions they are looking for?
Yeah, I don't know if there's like a list of the companies that have like positions attached to companies, but I do think a really good place to start is the Grace Hopper sponsors list. You can see all the companies that are sponsoring Grace Hopper, and typically part of the incentive to sponsor is like a spot at the career fair to hire from the attendee pool. So I think that's a really great spot to start.
All right, next question. How do virtual booths work? If you don't have interviews lined up yet, how do you get into the booths and work your way in?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that so applying online, I think is really critical because I think I've been to like in-person booths. And if I say, hey, I'm really interested in your company, how do I get an interview? And the first question they ask is, have you applied online? And if the answer is no, it's going to be apply online. So apply online, but let's say you've already done that. And then you go into the virtual booth, tell them what you've already done. Say, I applied online to this position. I did or did not receive a coding assessment. I'm really excited about your company for these reasons, and this is why I think I'm a good fit. What are my next steps? And I think by leaving it open-ended with the what are my next steps, they'll be able to tell you a little bit more about the application process at their specific company. And you can even ask them, like, how do interviews fall into this? I've already applied online. I would love to interview. Like, how do I go about scheduling an interview? But I think sometimes just letting them tell you about what you can expect from the process is a really great way for them to evaluate if you're a good fit, and then also for them to maybe fast track you for an interview.
So that brings us to an end. Huge thank you and shout out to KAYLEE for doing this session. I know we couldn't get through all of your questions. So here's what I would suggest. Go to the end of the video and in the comments, put a question. And once I find some time, I will try and answer them as much as I can. And again, as I said, if you're not comfortable with the public aspect, go to LinkedIn, connect with me, and ask me, send me a message, and I'll try my best to answer. Once again, thank you to KAYLEE. Do check out her blog. It's there in the description below. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun. And also, if you want, you can always find me over on Instagram. I post a coder thing, and you can feel free to DM me any additional questions that you all might have. I know there's just a lot of uncertainty around the virtual Grace Hopper, so I want to do what I can to help you all navigate this time.
Yes, do check out her Instagram handle. It's there in the description below. And if you can't find that link, just go type just a coder thing. That's her style.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
Yes, thank you, KAYLEE, for taking the time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.